All right, here we go, a blot and a half. We're learning tonight Daf Kuf Mem Hey, and as well Daf Kuf Mem Vav Amud Aleph. Some very, very critical dapim in regards to halachic psak, as we will see. A little bit more on the schita front. We'll be learning a little bit more about some other halachos. So let's just jump right in instead of me foreshadowing everything that's going to happen. We're on the bottom of Kuf Mem Daled Amud Beis. We are about 7 lines from the bottom of the page, and it starts with Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel. And what did he say? We've been learning about the various levels of schita. And here says the Gemara, Sochit Adam Eshkol Shel Anavim L'Socha Ktera, Aval Lo L'Socha Ke'ara. Very important din that plays out halacha l'maisa all the time. That even though it's true that the only time that one can violate the Yisur D'Oraisa of schita is by Zeis and Va'anavim, even though that's true, but the exception to the rule is when it's going to be squeezed on to a food. And when something is squeezed onto a food, so what that does is it removes all of our concerns, and it's therefore permissible to do so. However, you're not allowed to do it into a ke'ara, into a bowl. And we know that this plays out l'maisa. I gave the example last night about squeezing a lemon. You could squeeze it directly onto the fish. You could squeeze it onto a salad. It doesn't have to absorb. It just cannot be into a kli itself. In the Chaye Adam is the famous shita that in regards to tea, you can't put it in the tea, but the ha'arama is to stick it in the sugar. And the example he was talking about was a cube of sugar. I remember when we were younger, I think they still sell them in Jewel if you wanted to buy them. They sell the little sugar cubes. Pop them in your mouth just for a little fun. But that's how we would put lemon into tea. Continues the Gemara. Amar Rav Chizda, David Rabbeinu Nilmad, we're able to learn from this story of Rav that Cholev Adam Eiz L'Socha Ktera, one is able to milk an animal onto a food. Avalo L'Socha Ke'ara, and there too, just not into a bucket. It's the same thing. It's the same concept. It's different forms of schita because, conceptually, one is being cholev an animal and one is extracting liquid from a fruit. Halachically, they just fall under different categories, but they're not that different from one another. Alma, what do we see from there? This is a critical line in Lumdus, and we need to grasp this to understand much of what we're going to learn tonight. Alma, what we see from here is kasavar, mashke habala ochel, ochelhu. Very powerful idea is that this liquid that's coming out of the goat, the liquid that's coming out of the grapes, when it's squeezed onto a food, doesn't have the status of a liquid. It has the status of an ochel. And there are nafkaminas, as we will see right now. Masiv Rami Bar Chama, the question was asked. Now, wait a minute. Zav, if you have a person who is tamei betumas zav, these are one of the people who are mechusar kapara. So a zav is milking an animal. Shechole v'sa'ez hachalav tamei. The milk is going to be considered tamei. And asks the Gemara on this Marimakom from the Tanaim, v'amris mashke abala ochlen ochelhu. If you're saying that milk that's going onto a solid food is considered to be an ochel and not a mashke, then I don't understand how the zav made this tamei. There's no liquid to transfer the tuma. All the milk is ochel, because you just said, and I'll read the line again. The line is 4 lines from the bottom of the page. Mashke habala ochel ochelhu. So the liquid that you're milking out of the animal is not considered a mashke, and therefore it's not one of the yad shachad dam liquids. It's not one of the 7 liquids that can transfer tuma. And if that's true, then how did the zav make it tamim? Because this milk is not milk; it's an ochel because it's being put on a kedera. So says the Gemara. How did this food even have the capacity to become tamei? Answers the Gemara, that when it comes to animals that nurse, when you're extracting milk for the sake of nursing, that first drop is used to moisten the lips of the animal so that they can get a good seal around the anatomy so that they can drink better. So therefore, you're right that really the milk in general that you're going to be extracting, that you're milking out, that milk is considered ochel. It's not that milk that we're talking about, just the first droplet, which is used to basically create that seal for the animal, and that first droplet is what we are talking about that enables the transfer of tuma from a zav to the milk. Masiv Ravina asks, Tamei meis shesachat Zeisim ve'anavim, in a similar case scenario, you have a person who's tamei tumas meis, and he was squeezing zeisim ve'anavim kebeitza mechuvenes tahor. If it's an exact amount, in order for a food item that is tamei to transfer to something else, that food has to have a minimum shear of a kibetza. But here, this is mechuvenes. This is not the kibetza shear. It's whatever 0.999. It's close to that, but not quite there. Hayoser mikabetza tamei. But larger than that, if it is larger than that shear, then we do say that it's tamei. What we are missing here is the distinctions that we saw on the bottom of the page. We said that there was a distinction between kedera and ke'ara, whereas by the kedera, it would be permissible, and by the ke'ara, it's not. Here we don't see that. If you're trying to argue, this is what Rav Chizda tried to extrapolate from Rab. If what you're trying to argue is that mashke habala ochel is ochel, then b'mai is kasher. How did this all play out? It does. You don't have the right distinctions here to say that one should be true in the case of the ke'ara and one should be true in the case of the kedera. So says the Gemara, "Hu mosiv la v'hu mefarek la." He who asked the question is the one who answered it. This is Ravina, and the answer that he gave is b'sochet l'socha ke'ara. We're making a new kimta here, that the reason why you're tamei in this case is because it is going into a ke'ara. But you're right, that had it been that it was going to be onto a food, the distinction's still there. It's just not found in the Gemara itself. So then says the Gemara, Amar of Yirmiyah, this is Kitanayim. This is like the following interesting machlokes in the Tanayim. Hamachlik ban navim. Somebody takes grape juice and they use it to baste over a challah, which was probably used the way we use eggs over a challah today, which is to kind of give it a shine. So that was the goal here, hamachlik, from the word smooth or shiny. So there, the Tanakama says lo huchshar. That liquid is not huchshar. That liquid cannot generate a transfer in tuma. And Rabbi Huda argues, Rabbi Huda Omer Huchshar, he says, yes, it can. My lab, aren't they arguing, marsavar mashke habala ochel ochelhu, marsavar lab ochelhu? Aren't we arguing that according to the Tanakama, he says it's not, it's just ochel, so it's not Huchshar. And Rabbi Huda says it is going to be considered Huchshar. I would mix them up. He says it is going to be Huchshar, and he holds, therefore, that it's lab ochelhu. Amar Papa, no, you've analyzed that incorrectly. Tikule alma, everyone might agree. Mashke habala ochel lav ochel. Maybe everyone agrees that it's not ochel. Why then would the Tanakama say that hamachlik ba'novim is lo huchshar? Answers the Gemara, v'hacha b'mashke habali ibud kemiflage. No, they're only arguing about a liquid that's entire goal is to be wasted. You're not going to drink it. Its purpose is not to be even eaten. It's just, it has a secondary goal, which is to make sure that it's smooth, to make sure that it's shiny. And what would the machlokas then be? Marsavar mashkehu, marsavar lav mashke. That's just a machlokas. If you have grape juice that's le'ibud, do we consider that to be a thing or not a thing? So then here, when it's hamachlik ba'anavim, when you're using this grape juice to baste over a challah, that's what the Tanakama and Rabbi Huda are arguing about. And this may well be similar. This is also similar to the following machlokas tanim. The Tanya, 1/4 of the way down on Kuf Mem Hey Amud Aleph, the Brisa writes, if you are squeezing a little bit of an olive to see how ready it is, if you're intentionally making a bruise in it to make it a little bit sweeter, that's what the Meforshim here point out is what they're doing here. I think Rashi says that explicitly. Rashi says halfway down, Dibur Hamaskel Hamifatse Bezeisim, and he says Kadishu Rakin. It just softens it up a little bit, but that's what you intended to do. You wanted to soften it, and your hands were tamei, huchshar. That can make it tamei. L'sofasan b'melach, if you're doing it in such a way so that it could absorb more salt, so then lo huchshar, that's not considered enough. And if you're only squeezing it leida im higio zeisav lemisuk, if you're just enough to see that it's possibly ready to be eaten, so then imlav, im higio zeisav lemisuk imlav, if that's why you're checking it, then lo huchshar, that's where the machlokas is. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, huchshar. My lab, aren't they arguing b'ha kamiflige the mar savar mashke, omer leibud mashkehu, umar savar lab mashkehu? Don't we see that your precedent from the case of hamachlik bezeisim, because we said that grape juice that you're putting on top of the bread is that maybe it's going to be li'ibud and therefore it's a nothing, and maybe it's going to ibud and we don't care, it's still a something. That could be their machlokas. So then maybe we saw that machlokas here too. So Amar Rav Huna b'Rei Rav Yoshua hani tanoi b'mashke ha'omei li'ibud pligi. They're arguing about different things. One machlokas is about whether or not a liquid that's going to be wasted is actually considered li'ibud. Is it considered a thing or not? The Hanach and our Tanaim are b'mashke ha'omei letzachzecho kamifli. They're arguing about different things, so you can't really draw a perfect conclusion from one case to the next. Amar Rav Zera, about halfway down. Amar Rav Zera, Amar Rav Chia, Bar Ashi, Amar Rav. Rav taught us a din that we've learned already, but with a twist. Sochet adam eshkol shalanavim l'sochak dera v'lo l'sochak ara, that we learned. That if a person were to squeeze grapes and olives on top of a food, that's fine, but not into a bowl. And then he adds something that did not exist in the previous version of this, that was on the bottom of Kuf Mem Dalad and Beis. What does he add? V'dag l'tziro. you're allowed to squeeze out the fish for its fish juice. Afilu l'socha ke'ara. There we have a kula. There, not only can it go on food, you can squeeze the fish to collect the fish oil, the fish juice. I don't know what it is. I guess fish oil, whatever you're squeezing out. Brine is what we cook, is what we keep it in. I don't think it's brine, but it's something. So whatever the juices are that are squeezed out. But I guess I don't know. I've squeezed fish before from fishing. They don't ooze oil. I don't know what comes out of them. I have no idea. I don't know. Yosef Ravdimi v'ka'amar la lahashmaisa. Ravdimi was repeating this. Amar le Abai le Ravdimi. Abai raised a concern. Atun mishmei de Rav masnisun. You who taught this idea of the dag letziro, you who taught this in the name of Rav, all is good. V'lo kasha lefu. Anan, but we who quoted this din of the grapes being squeezed, mishmei de Shmuel masnisin la v'kashalon. So that's going to be a problem for us because seemingly Shmuel would not have agreed to the idea of dag letziro. That we said in the name of Rav that would be mutter, but Shmuel would not say that because mi Omar Shmuel dag letziro afilo socha ka'ara. You think that Shmuel would say that this is going to be true in a ka'ara? That's definitely not true. The lenient in a bowl just to collect the liquid? No way. The itmar. We have a separate statement in the Amoraim, a machlokas between the Amoraim as follows. Kvashim, you have things like pickles, things that have been salted. Shesachtan, if you squeeze them. Amar Rav taught us the following. Legufan mutter, if you're doing it because you want the pickle to have less juice in it, that's fine. Lememehen pater aval aser. But if you're doing it because you like drinking pickle juice, which is weird, but if you like drinking pickle juice, so then that would be an iser derabbanan. The shlakos, what about vegetables? That have been like boiled in liquid, super high. They're very, very saturated vegetables. Like if you can imagine in a chicken soup, like one of the vegetables that stay in there and brew while you cook them, one of the carrots. So there, what if you squeeze? Those are shlakos. The shlakos says Rab bein legufan bein lememehen mutter. There you can just literally squeeze them barehanded and make carrot juice out of the carrots in your soup bowl, no problem at all. The Shmuel Amar. Now remember, this was only a problem according to Shmuel because we said that there's no way that Shmuel would agree to the din of dag letziro. Let's see how it plays out here. The Shmuel Amar kvashim, echad kvashim ve'echad shlakos. He has the same din for both things that are like pickles and things that are like the carrots in the soup. And he makes the distinction legufan mutter. If you're squeezing them out to make the vegetable better, more edible, no problem. And the memehen pater avalasar. Omar Lei says to him, you're asking me about the world of Shmuel and whether or not he would allow dag letziro according to your approach. But your whole question is flawed. You've totally got this wrong. And he quotes from the pasuk in Eov that says, "Ve'enai ra'u v'lo zar." My eyes saw, and it was not strange. What does that mean? And here's the Mesorah. And this is how we learn what generations Amoraim were in. What an important historical Gemara for timing of when people live. Check this out. Mipume de Rav Yirmiyah Shmieli. I heard this. Who's talking now? So this is Amar Leah Elokim. Let's just get back. It's Amar. This is Abai was talking to Rav Dimi. So Abai was a 4th century Amora. So let's follow the chain here. Mipume de Rav Yirmiyah Shmieli. I heard this from Rav Yirmiyah, who heard it. Rav Yirmiyah mirab Zera, Rav Zera mirab Chia bar Ashi, Rav Chia bar Ashi me Rav. So this is a beautiful flow of Talmud Rebbe. Great piece of Gemara for when these names come up in the future, so that we can see where the history is. And the point of this Gemara is that you who think that you heard this din about squeezing grapes and olives, that you're allowed to squeeze it onto a plate of food, but that you're not allowed to squeeze it onto a kid. You thought you heard it from Shmuel. You're pashut wrong, because I have the whole Masorah right here. Shmuel never said it, and that is how the Gemara concludes that Shmuel never said it, and seemingly we paskin like Rav that one is allowed to squeeze grapes and olives directly onto food and just not into a ka'ara itself. Now the Gemara is going to jump into a machlokas, the same Gemara that we just saw with an added shita and then some analysis afterwards. Gufa, this line that we just saw from the Amoraim says the Gemara as follows. Kvashim, shesachtan, as we just saw. Amar Rav said, for the kvashim, for the pickles, legufan mutter lememehen pater avalasar, you're allowed to squeeze out the liquid to eat the pickle so that it has less liquid in it, but not to make pickle juice. The shlakos, the carrots in the soup, and the gufan ben lememehen mutter, he allowed all of that. Shmuel Amar, Shmuel said something else. He said, in both cases, the halacha is the same by kvashos and by shlakos. by kvashim and shlakos, that if it's legufan, it's mutter, that if you're just doing it to make the vegetable better, no problem. Lememehen, but if you're trying to extract the liquid, so that's going to be an Isser D'Rabbanan. And now we see a third shita on the scene. We saw Rav and we saw Shmuel, and then the Gemara adds in Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, echad kvashim ve'echad shlakos, legufan mutter, lememehen chayav chatas. Wow, a whole new din. That's a whole new layer here. So he says that echad kvashim ve'echad shlakos, legufan mutter, lememehen chayav chatas. So none of these three shitas agree with one another. And Mesive, the Gemara is now going to quote a source in the Tanaim that uproots all three shitas. This source in the Tanaim does not agree with Rab, it does not agree with Shmuel, and it does not agree with Rabbi Yochanan. How so? Let's see. Mesive, sochtin kvashim b'Shabbos letzorach haShabbos. You are allowed to squeeze out kvashim, the pickles that have extra juice in them, on Shabbos for the sake of Shabbos. Why do we not see a distinction here between gufan and meimehen? All the Amoraim made the distinction in different ways. Granted, Rav said X and Shmuel said Y, and Rabbi Yochanan said Z. This source in the Tanaim just says it's mutter to be sochet kvashim, but none of the Amoraim left this as is. They all gave the distinction. Let's finish this source in the Tanaim, and then we'll go to our question. Avalo lemotzei Shabbos. You're obviously not allowed to do it for after Shabbos. So the second part we already knew from another place, but because the ikar part of this was the first source in the Tanaim, and what it said was that there's no distinction by the schita of kvashim between legufan and the meimehen. So says the Gemara, kasha the Rav, kasha the Shmuel, kasha the Rabbi Yochanan. This doesn't make any sense. Where did they get this from? You can't just make things up. You have to have a Masorah. If you have a source in the Tanaim that makes no distinction between the Gufan and the Meimehen, who gives you the right, respectfully, to these Chashav Amoraim? They don't need me to ask the question. The Gemara is asking it. But why are you allowed to make a distinction that the Tanaim never made? So it says the Gemara, Rav Matar Tzataime, Shmuel Matar Tzataime, Rav Yochanan Matar Tzataime. Basically, all of them rework this source in the Tanaim in order to fix it to their language. Rav Matar Tzataime, how does Rav understand this? We're about 10 lines from the bottom of the page. First word on the line is Sochtet. And this is how Rav would make his Shita fit into this source in the Tanaim that otherwise seemingly didn't agree with any of these Shitas. Sochten kvashim b'Shabbos etzorach haShabbos, avalo lemotzei Shabbos. We saw that line. What does he add into this source? Ba'med dvar ma'amur in legufan aval meimehen pater avalas. He mamish adds in the language to make it work. That's how he fixes it. Ushlakos, he adds in this too. This source in the Tanaim wasn't talking about shlakos at all. Ushlako is bein legufan bein meimehen mutter. And v'zeisim anavim lo yischo v'im sachtan chayav chata. So that's how Rav would fix it. He adds in b'med dvar ma'amur. He adds in what's missing to make his shita fit. It's not that he's twisting it. That was his pshat in the Mishnah. That's how he understood pshat in the Mishnah. There's two, either that was his understanding or that's how his Rebbe taught it him, whatever the history was. But his Rebbe was Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. So he's a really authentic source to say this is what Rebbe meant. He's the right person to say it. He was in what's referred to as the Dor HaMa'avar, the generation of Amoraim that transferred out of Tanaim and into the world of the Amoraim. So he had direct access. So that's probably a very good pshat. Let's see how Shmuel would answer this. It says the Gemara, Shmuel, the first of the middle width lines, 5, 6, 7 lines from the bottom. Shmuel Matarz the time. How does he understand? So it said, Sochten kvashim b'Shabbos tzarech haShabbos, hu adin l'shlakos. Same thing is true by shlakos. B'med dvar mamurim. And when does this apply? Legufan aval meimehen pater. Aval meimehen pater aval aser. V'zeisim v'anavim lo yischot im sachad chayav chatas. And he quotes everything like the rest of the Mishnah. Again, adding in the caveats that we need in the Mishnah to make his shita fit with the shita in the Tanaim. Rabbi Yochanan, 5 lines from the bottom of Tarz time. How does he fit it all in? Sochten kvashim l'tzarech haShabbos aval lemotzei Shabbos. And then he adds in echad kvashim ve'echad shlakos, both of them. B'med dvar mamur in the gufan aval meimehen lo yischot im sachad nasa kimish sachad zeisim anafim b'chayv chatas. So if we look back at all three of these shitas, we'll see then how they fit perfectly into this Mishnah after we butcher the Mishnah and insert their insertions. But again, I don't mean it critically. There certainly was something going on. Think about it this way: if all of them added the distinction of the gufan and the meimehen, there had to be a Masorah going around that when Rabbi Yehuda Nasi wrote this Mishnah, that there was a chiluk to be made between Gufan and the Meimehen. And all of them had it. They just didn't have a Mari Makom for it. So they said, there's something wrong with the Mishnah. Whoever wrote down Rabbi Yehuda Nasi's first, when he started copying, this was way before the printing press, the 1400s. This was in the year 200. This was all done by hand. They had scribes sitting there. So somebody made a mistake. They left out the paragraph that said B'med Dvar Mamur. Now we don't know what that was exactly. That's why we have a machlokas between Rav Yochanan and Shmuel and Rav to make sure that it's all accurate. We don't know, but that's what the Gemara says. Amar Rav Chia bar Ashi Amar Rav Davar Torah. Eino chayav al drisa zeisim anavim bilvad. Eno chayv ella al drisa zeisim v'anavim bilvad. The only time you can enter into an isur d'oraisa when it comes to schita is with grapes and olives, no other fruits. So the Rishonim here have to get into this. What does that mean? That is it only these things? What if other things become as ubiquitous as that? What was that? So there we said that was Nisr Darabanan. It was in the middle category, Tutim V'Rimonim. There were three categories of Zeisim V'Anavim were the top tier. Then there were Tutim V'Rimonim, namely fruits that are generally squeezed, oranges, grapefruits, today everything pretty much. And then there's a third category of things that never get squeezed. I don't know what those are. I mean, cantaloupe, I guess. Is there cantaloupe juice? Probably. But it's not something that's normal. And yesterday we also discussed what's normal. Is it that one family in Beis Menachem, or do we look at Aravia that we have to get into that? So that's why you need to be shown. If I've learned nothing from giving Daf Yomi, it has given me an intense appreciation for Rishonim, because there is no way to string all of this together as a balabas. So you need to sit and learn all day, every day for your whole life, and be exceptional in your learning, and then maybe you'll have a clue. It's I don't know how they do it. I shared this before. When I was in Smicha, there was a guy who was actually pompous enough to say this out loud. I don't need the Rishonim. I can paskin hilchos nida from the Gemara Maseches nida. Shem Yerachim. I think he should learn Krisos before he learns nida. That's not a good idea. Okay, so that's what the Gemara says here in the name of Rab, that's the only time you ever have an Isser D'Oraisa is by Zeisim V'Anavim. V'chein Tani Debei Menashe Davar Torah Eino Chayv, same thing. Eino Chayv El Al Drisa Zeisim V'Anavim Bilvad, except that he adds the following: Ve Ein Eid Mipi Eid Kasher. When do we allow a word of mouth type of edus? Eid Mipi Eid, meaning I go to Bezdin and I say, Michael told me that he saw this crime taking place. When do we allow such a thing? Normally, edus has to be direct. When do we allow? Just imagine in a secular court, my neighbor told me that they saw the crime happen. So in the halachic realm, I don't care what your neighbor saw. They're not sitting here. You're sitting here. But there are times when we say Eid Mipi Eid. When are they? They Eid Mipi Eid Kasher. Ella, turning to the top of Kuf Mem Hamad Beis. Ella the Eidus Isha Bilvad, says Rashi, such a powerful and frankly emotional Rashi that speaks to something that we have seen in our lifetimes. Lomar leisha meis ba'alech de'akilu baraban mishumiguna. Wow. The Eid Mipi Eid is a kula that's built in because of aguna. These are the stories that people told by 9/11. I watched the husband jump out the building. Or my friend told me, right? This is the Eid Mipi Eid. My friend told me he watched person X jump. So that works for aguna, according to this Rashi. Even, right, but what you're saying, the Eid we couldn't have. The Eid could be dead. Yeah, so this is something that we've relied upon. And I remember back in the day, I was in YU when all this happened, and Rav Willig was paskening these shadows, Rav Shechter too, were paskening shadows about aguna based on these wild, on videos, just these crazy, but DNA wasn't enough, because if you found DNA, but maybe they didn't die. So unless you found a critical limb, like there's no way to really, crazy shiloh. But that's what this din is being said right here, is that Eid Mipi Eid, we allow the indirect edus to apply because of aguna. Very powerful Rashi. Ibayalahu, so the Gemara says, wait a minute, Eid Mipi Eid le'edus bechor mahu. What about Eid Mipi Eid in another realm? So that's a machlokes, Ravami Asir, Rav Asi Shari. Amalei Ravami, the Rav Asi, I don't understand. V'hatana de Bei Menasya, Ein Eid Mipi Eid Kasher, Ela Edus Isha Bilvad. We just talked about this a line ago. So what's the problem? Why are you misunderstanding what's happening here? So says the Gemara, Ema, you misunderstood the line, and actually we paskin like this. Ema, le'edus she'isha kshera la. No, it's not only, and it kind of pulls the weight out of Rashi's comment, it's not only specifically for a woman for aguna, that's also true, but it's any edus for which we accept edus isha. Under all of those circumstances, we also accept Eid Mipi Eid. And we would accept Eid Mipi Eid by Bechor, because a woman is shaykh to be an Eid in such a case. Rav Yemar, Achsher Eid Mipi Eid LeBechor, and he allowed it. Kari Alei Meremar, and they used to call him, they nicknamed him Yemar Shari Bukhara. You're the rabbi who allowed for the Bechor to be considered a Bechor or not a Bechor based on Eid Mipi Eid testimony. And such is the halacha. Eid Mipi Eid Kasher LeBechor. So it's a little bit more expansive. We accept the Gemara's second version, which is that when we say that Ein Eid Mipi Eid Kasher Ela Mipnei Ha'isha, it's when a woman is able to give testimony. That's when we allow for Eid Mipi Eid. It's also true by Aguna. It's not detracting from it, but it's expanding it a little bit wider. So now Cholos Devash, the Gemara spoke about a case of the honeycombs. So let's get into this 3 lines into the wider line, 6 lines down. Ki Atzer Avoshi Amina Harda, Asa Ba'isi must needs to be that he brought the following Mishnah when he came from Naharda to Eretz Yisrael. Zaysim Va'anavim Shiris Ganamer of Shabbos V'yatzmei Atzman Asurin. If a person were to have olives and grapes, they were crushed before Shabbos and liquid exuded from them on Shabbos, they're not allowed to be consumed. Rabbi Eliezer v'Reb Shimon matirin. Now, we saw this already, but we only saw it in the name of Reb Shimon, and here we added the name of Rabbi Eliezer. So it says the Gemara, Amar Rav Yosef, Gabra Yisera Asal Ashwinan. You're quoting this just to add in one more person to the list. You're adding Rabbi Eliezer to the Gemara. It says the Gemara, no, that's not why I added it. Amar Le, Abaye Tuva Kamashmalan. I'm learning a very important halacha here. Diimi Masnisan from our Mishnah, Hava Mina Hasam Hu Demei Kara Uchla Ulavisof Uchla. In our Mishnah, where we were treating that liquid like an ochel, so then maybe we would have said that the din would have been one way. Aval hacha demei kara uchla sof mashke malo kamash malan. I would have thought that the din might be different had it not been for this additional comment. So your comment applies to case X and mine applies to case Y to make sure that we have a little bit more of an expansive understanding. Okay, let's get to the next Mishnah. It says the Mishnah on Kuf Mem Hey and Beis 12 lines down. Kol sheba b'chamin me'erev Shabbos shor nosa b'chamin b'Shabbos. Anything that was cooked, effectively, anything that was cooked before Shabbos can be put back in heat on Shabbos. This is a principle called bishul achar bishul, or ein bishul achar bishul, to be a little bit more accurate. And we will get into some of the distinction about bishul achar bishul l'davar lach, something that's moist, bishul achar bishul l'davar yavesh, with something that is dry. We'll discuss all of that as we progress, not today, but hopefully in the future. B'chol sheloba b'chamin me'erev Shabbos, anything that was not cooked before Shabbos, ma'dichan oso b'chamin b'Shabbos, you can just put a small amount, you can sprinkle some hot water on it, that's fine. However, not with all foods, chutz min hamliach hayashan, except for foods that are like the fish that are very salted, because those cook easily. The kul yasa ispanin, which is translated by the Meforshim here as the Spanish mackerel. And with those types of fish, which cook very easily, and this is a very important line as well, shadachasan zohi gmar malachta. All they need to be cooked is that tiny amount of bishul, of a sprinkling. They don't need any more than that. So this hadacha, this light rinsing of hot water, that's when we say that it's going to be considered bishul. Says the Gemara, kigon mai. What are we talking about? What's the Gemara talking about? What does kigon mai mean? Take a look at Rashi. Rashi at the open of the Gemara, 15 lines down or so in Rashi, the first of the Gemara, also kigon mai. Kigon mai have ba bechamin. What are we talking about? That which was warmed up on Shabbos, shechozrin v'shorin oso bechamin. That we are now allowed to do that. Amar, back in the Gemara, kigon mai, what foods get reheated? Amar Rav Safra, and this is not something that I would recommend. I do not recommend trying this at home. Kigon tarnagolta de Rabbi Abba. He had a particular chicken that had some healing powers. So it's been cooked before. But what they would do is stick it back in water, and you would drink the water in which that was in. Not my cup of tea. So what happened there? But Amar of Safra, Zim Nachada, Iklais Lahasam, I went there, the Ochlen Mine, and I drank it, and I was about to throw up. I totally relate to that. The Ilo, Rabbi Abba, the Ashki, and Chamer Bar Tlasa Tarfe, Isnase. If he had not given me wine, three-year aged wine, I was going to just lose my lunch. It was just not good. But that was an example of what they did. They had this bird that they put in the water, and people would drink the juice, and it would be healing properties. Okay. Rabbi Yochanan, right, mikutach de bavli. Every time he would think about kutach habavli, he would spit, like he would get nauseous from it. Amar Rabbi Yosef, the lirok anan mitarnagolta Rabbi Abba. I would also spit by the juice from the tarnagol of Rabbi Abba. The Odamar Rav Gaza said, Zim nachadek leis lahasam, the avdis kutach de bavloi, and we made the kutach habavli that you were so grossed out by. However, sha'ilu mine kol briche ma'arava. A lot of people were actually requesting this food, so you might have had a hard time with it. Other people were chasing after it to use it as some type of their medicinal potion, whatever it was. Says the Gemara, kol shalo b'chamin. If something was not warmed up before Shabbos and you are madiachet and you are madiachet, so what's the din? What have you violated something? So says the Gemara, we're a little bit more than 1/3 of the way down on Kuf Mem Hey Beis Hidiach Mai. If in fact you did this with the hot water, what's the din? Amar Rav Yosef Hidiach Chayv Chatas. That's not good. That's mamish bishul on Shabbos. Omar Mar Barei de Ravina Afana Nami Tanina. We've seen this. Chutz Mimoliach Yashan Mikol Yis Benin Shadachas and Zoig Marmalachtan Shmamina. That's how we know these things are hadachas and Zoig Marmalachtan. These things cook very easily. And this is where we get into these, powerful shilas about making tea on Shabbos, and it's Kalei Bishul. It cooks so easily. And then on one extreme, you're making tea is asur, and then on the other extreme, the Rav was of the opinion of Yosef Tabalevi Soloveitchik is that you're right, that had tea been a food, that it would be kali abishal, it would be this, kuli isbenin. But tea is a tavlin, and tavlin you're allowed to cook in a klisheni. It's a wild kula. If they think about it, it's a leaf, but it's not a leaf now. They ground it up. Isn't that how all herbs are made? All spices, oregano, aren't all of them made that way? So that's why the Rav felt that it wasn't a maichel, it was considered tavlin. So again, that's why people are machmir on tea because of the concern that it's a food and it cooks so easily. But there are others who view tea in another way because it's just not a food. It's not a maichel, it's tavlin. So that's what the Gemara says. Shma mina. Yasiv Reb Chia bar Abba v'Rab Asi kamed Reb Yochanan v'Yasiv Reb Yochanan v'kamen namnim. They were all sitting in front of Reb Yochanan, and Reb Yochanan was kind of nodding off, half listening, half sleeping, really all listening. Omar le Reb Chia bar Abba le Rab Asi. Reb Chia says to Rab Asi, Mipnei ma ofos shebebavel shmeinin. Why are the birds in Bavel fat? Omar le kalach lemidbar azah v'erech shmeinin mehen. I can show you fatter ones in Eretz Yisrael. So then says the Gemara, that was question one. Question two, why are the holidays in Bavel very happy? Because they're poor. So on Shabbos, they get to stop thinking about how poor they are and they get to focus in. They get to laser in on Shabbos. Why are they so sharp? They dress so regal. Why do they have to wear the finest? Says the Gemara, because the people there are not machshav talmidei chachamim. People who are machshav talmidei chachamim, you see a talmid chacham, you clamor, you try to get close, you try to look at their face, the ziva panim. But if you live in a place where people are not machshav talmidei chachamim, then you got to dress the part. Then you have to dress chashav and make yourself look like a chashav. We're not talking about what we learned many blot ago, that a talmid chacham can't walk around with dirt all over their clothes. That's for sure not allowed. That's a lack of kavod Torah. That's not right. But in this case, what we're talking about is dressing to the hilt to make sure that you look great, because they don't treat you as a talmid chacham, but at least they should think that you're a chashav person because of your clothes. Next question: why are they considered to have this spiritual sense of negativity, or disgust would be a more accurate translation, but it's not a physical representation, but a spiritual one. Says the Gemara, because they eat these creepy corals. During this conversation, these are the conversations that happens, and then itar behu Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan kind of fully sat up straight in his chair. Amar lehu, he said to them, Dardiki, my children, lo kach amarti lechem. Didn't I tell you to keep your mouth? Your parents would say this when you're younger. If you don't have anything good to say, don't say it at all. That's what Rabbi Yochanan said to them, but he did it with a pasuk. Lo kach amarti lechem. Didn't I tell you? The pasuk says that more lachachma chosiat. This is a total play on words. If you're going to say something, it better be as clear to you as the fact that your sister is prohibited to you. Being lav, lo tamrehu. Just stop talking. If you don't know what you're talking about, then stop talking. If you don't know, it's as clear as your sister being usher. Says the Gemara, Amrullah, they said to him, we don't even know which one you're criticizing us for. Please tell us. The lemolan mar, eza mehen. Which one are you talking about? So he goes through all of them. It's because they were never exiled, and that's based on the pasuk Shenemar Shana Moab Minu Rav Shaketu El Shemarov. So that's the pasuk that the reason why they were Shemainin is because they never went into Galus. V'hacha uvegola lo halach, and they never went into the Galus. V'hacha menal, and here in Eretz Yisrael, how do we know that they did go into the Galus? The Galu, the Tanya. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Nun Beis Shana Lo Avar Ish Yehuda. There were a 52-period year where no one crossed into Yehuda. They were in exile. Shnamar Al Heharim Esa Bechi Banehi Me'of Hashamayim Ba'ad Behema Nadadu Halchu Behema Beis Hey Meme Begematria Chamshin V'Tartin Habu. And what do we see in that pasuk? We see birds as well, that they were Gala, they were Gola, they were exiled, and therefore they were even bigger. Amar Rav Yaakov, Amar Rav Yochanan, Kulan Chazru, all of the fish that left, that were nigleft from Eretz Yisrael, they all came back. Chazru, Chutz Mikul Yasa Isman, and except for the Spanish mackerel. I wonder if that's still true today, that they're not, I mean, they stock lakes now, but I wonder what the natural habitat would have been. The Amar Rav says, Hani Madre de Bavel, Nahadre Maya Le'in Itam, it was like an uphill swim for them to get back from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael. Bahai, and this fish, the Spanish mackerel, the Kolyasa Ispan and Kavan de Lo Sharer Shidre, because its spine wasn't so strong, Lo Matzi Salik, he wasn't able to make it back up to Eretz Yisrael. Why was it, says Rabbi Yochanan, talking back to now to his Talmidim, that they were so happy on on Babel, because they were excluded from a particular klala. What klala was that? As the pasuk says, "V'hishpati kol misosa chaga." Let me just get the whole pasuk. Chaga chadasha v'shabata v'chol moada. That's pasuk 1. Uchsiv, and the second pasuk says, "Chodshechem u'moadechem sana'ah nafshi hayu alai latorach nil'esi niso." That is the whole pasuk there. My hayu alav latorach. Amar Rebbe Lazar, Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Lo Dayan L'Yisrael Shechotin. It's bad enough that the Jews do Averos. This is such a unique Gemara. Lefi she'ein matri. Let's say that's what the Gemara says. Let me just get it right here. Sorry. Lo Dayan L'Yisrael Shechotin lefanai. It's bad enough that they do Averos before me. Ela shematrichen osi leida iz gzera kasha bi'aleihem. But I just don't know which terrible thing to give the Jews. That's a crazy thing to hear a father talk about a child. These are very powerful words. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak. This was post Churban. Whenever there was any holiday, the soldiers were in Sipori. They were always there, always present afterwards, as to torture the Jews. All these different types of soldiers and commanders, all to make things difficult. Why is it that the Talmidei Chachamim in Bavel had to dress so regally? They don't live there, so the locals are not going to be mash of them. The Amri Inshi, people say, in your city, we know your name. Okay, you're Rabbi X, you're Mr. Y, you're Dr. whoever. However, below Mata Tosvai, when you don't live in your city, then we look at your threads, we look at your clothes, and you need to represent. And there's a whole talk about this. You go to the airport, like back in the day when people would travel in the airport 50 years ago, people mamish put on their finest. And now people travel in their pajamas. It's a big shift in culture. It didn't take that long. But we have to make sure that we're not traveling in our pajamas. We have to represent. Wearing a kippah makes a huge difference. It makes a huge difference of how they view all Jews. And this pasuk supports this idea. Tani Rabbi Yosef, they are the ones who make their clothes beautiful for the sake of Torah. Why do they still have this spiritual disgusting component to them? Because they were not at Har Sinai. What happened there? Turning to the top of Kuf Mem Vav Amud Aleph. When the Nachash was ba al Chava, Rashi, Dibur Masal Sheba Nachash al Chava, Shenasan la Eitza le'echol min ha'etz ba'aleha k'dichsiv hanachash hishiani lashon nisuin hisiani, a language of marriage. So just an interesting interplay here. Were they intimate? Were they not? Is it a metaphor? Is it not? So this Rashi would be a part of that conversation. So that's what happened when the Nachash was Ba'al Chava, was Hitel Ba Zuama, and Yisrael she'amdu al Har Sinai Pascha Zuama son. The Jews who were at Har Sinai, so the experience of Har Sinai removed from them the Zuhama, removed from them the spiritual malady. Mashein ken ovdei kochavim shelo amdu al Har Sinai lo Pascha Zuama son. So that does, unfortunately for them, that they still have this Zuhama. Maybe we're not in touch with it right now in our culture, but that's nevertheless the case. What about a convert? They weren't at Har Sinai. Do they still have Zuama? They're gonna become part of Klal Yisrael with the Zuama. Like, how does that work? So we have a pasuk for. Even though they weren't there, mazlaihu havu. Their mazel was there. Even those who are not with us today at Har Sinai, and therefore those people, whoever they are, seemingly even before they convert, don't have this zuama because they were einenu po, but they were still included in this in the merit of Har Sinai. But this was not agreed upon by everyone. Upliga Rabbi Abba Bar Kahana, Damar Rabbi Abba Bar Kahana, ad shlosha doros lo paska zuama me avosenu. Even from Avraham's time, we still had Zuama because Avram holidus Ishmael. We see there that was because of Zuama. Yitzchak holidus Esav, and finally, in the third generation, Yaakov holid Yud Beis Shvatim shelo haya behen shum tofi. So it takes 3 generations. So according to the first opinion, any ger, it's immediately removed. And according to the second opinion, it takes 3 generations. That would be the nafkamina between them. I guess that means l'maisa, if a person were to convert, I don't know how the metaphysics works here, but if they convert, does it take 3 generations, or is it 3 generations from It must be that, because Abraham was before Harzina. It must be 3 full generations to be enough Kamina. Mishnah. The Mishnah, 1/4 of the way down, this Mishnah is all about opening cans and opening bottles on Shabbos. Big machlokos in the poskim. 3 types of bottle caps that we have. We have the plastic ones that are pre-made and jammed on. The metal ones, like you'll have in like a grape juice bottle, like the sparkling grape juice, the metal one, that's crimped on. And the third one is like a Coke can. So we'll discuss some of those as we navigate. I don't want to take too much of your time, but let's just learn through this Mishnah. You are allowed to break open. You are allowed to break open a barrel in which there are dried figs, provided that it wasn't your intention to make a kli. You're not allowed to make a hole in the cover, a small hole in the cover. You can destroy the cover, you can ruin it, but you can't make a nice hole in it. The chachamim allow it. You're not allowed to make a hole on the side of it, like putting in a spigot. And if there was already a hole, you're not allowed to put wax in there, because that's smoothing things out. This is like the toothpaste shaila. Can you use toothpaste? Well, can you use wax? So some of the poskim are very alarmed by the use of toothpaste on Shabbos because it's too thick. He lived in this city in Eretz Yisrael for a major portion of his life. The Meforshim point out that he lived there for a couple decades. He lived there for almost 18 years, I think it was. They brought this story in front of him about Memareach with the wax, and he was very concerned. He thought that maybe it wasn't necessarily Doraisa. Amar Rav Oshia, what were we talking about in the first case of the barrel? What was the first case that you can break a barrel to eat the dried fruit? Amar Rav Oshia, lo shanu ela derusos. We're only talking about dried figs that are pressed. Aval mefurados, if they're loose, if they're not pressed together, lo. Asks the Gemara, why mefurados lo? Really? Are you sure that's true? We have a brisa. It's not a brisa. We have a source from the Tanai. Meisive, almost halfway down Kuf Mem Vav Mad Aleph. Meisive, Reb Shimon ben Gamliel Omer. Maybe Adam es hachabis. You're allowed to take your big samurai sword and cut off the top of the barrel of your wine. So why can't I take off the barrel if it's mefurados, if the dried figs are separated? I don't understand why if I can cut off the whole top of a barrel of wine, why are you limiting me on what type of figs are inside the container? Who cares? What's the difference? So says the Gemara, Ahi Rabbanan. That brisa, that source in the Tanaim that allows you to cut off the top of the barrel was a sheet of the Rabbanan. Masnisin Rav Nechemyahi. Masnisin, our Mishnah was like the opinion of Rav Nechemya. And Rav Nechemya had a very strict line about muksa. In short, if you had no purpose for the knife, you couldn't pick it up for food. Now, the knife's purpose was not to cut the barrel. The knife's purpose was for food. So here's the lumdus. If they're drusos, if they're all pressed together, then I need the knife to cut them once I cut open the barrel. So Rav Nechemya would say, fine, you're allowed to pick up the knife. But if they're already loose and freestanding, Rav Nechemya would not allow you to pick up the knife because even after you cut open the barrel, you have nothing to cut. The food needs no cutting. So that's why Rav Nechemya was so strict. Says the Gemara, it's a little bit dachuk. Umay dochked Rav Oshia. Why did Rav Oshia force us to have this ukimta? L'okme masnisin Rav Nechemya uvidrusos. Why did you have to say that our Mishnah was like Rav Nechemya and all the figs are pressed together and therefore you need the knife because they're pressed together? Lokma b'mifurados v'rabbanan. You could have said that our Mishnah was like the Rabbanan who allowed by mifurados. So why'd you give him this strange answer? You could have said that our Mishnah still works according to the shita that we paskin like. We don't hold like Rav Nechemya. Answers the Gemara. Because the language was off. Amar Rabba Masnisim Kshise. The language in our Mishnah was very difficult. Why did our Mishnah talk about figs? My area, Ditani Grogeros, Lisni Peros. Talk about fruits in general. Why did you have to go the route about talking about dried figs? So that was the diuk that Rav Oshia made, that he forced our Gemara to be, our Mishnah to be like Rav Nechemya. Therefore, Ella Shmamina Bedrusos, it must be that we are talking about figs that are pressed in. And that's why Rav Nechemya allowed it, because they were pressed in. But had they been loosely there, then he would not have allowed you to pick up the knife in the first place, because after you cut off the barrel, the knife would have been useless. And the knife was really for the food and not for the barrel. Tanya Chada, Choslos Shel Grogeros. If you have these ties, you have these bundles of grogeros, of dried figs with shel tamarim, Matir Umafkia V'chotech. You are allowed to untie them. You're allowed to unravel them. All of these different types of openings you're allowed to do. The Tanya Idach, another brisa says, Matir, Ava, the Tanya, sorry, did I skip a line? No, let me just read it again. Tanya Chada, Choslos Shel Grogeros, Shel Tamarin, Matir Umafkia V'chosech. You can only do some of these types of openings, but you can't do all of these types of openings. So it says the Gemara, same answer. It just depends on how you look at it. Tanya, what does Rabbi Nechemia actually hold? Rabbi Nechemia Omer, afilu tarvad ve'afilu talis ve'afilu saki, a spoon, a talis, and a knife. Ein nitlin ela l'tzorach tashmisha. You can only pick them up if you need them. You can't just randomly pick things up on Shabbos. There needs to be a purpose. That's when you're allowed to pick things up. That's Rabbi Nechemia, classical Rabbi Nechemia. And therefore, you're not allowed to do every version of untying. You're allowed to do the ones that you need. You're not allowed to open it if all the figs are loose inside, because then your sword has no purpose. The knife has no purpose. Last question and answer for the night, which will take us to the two dots in a few lines. Bo minei of Sheshes. Are we allowed to pierce a hole with like a spear? Not a normal way to open a bottle of wine on Shabbos, a barrel of wine. Are we allowed to do that on Shabbos? Would we argue the pischa kamachavin v'aser? Is that like making its own opening and therefore it's aser? Or dilma la'ayin yafe kamachavin? You just want to make sure that everyone can have access to take a lot of wine, and therefore Bashari answers the Gemara. Amar le the pischa kamachavin v'aser. You're not allowed. Says the Gemara, are you sure? Maybe Adam chavis shel yainu matiz rosha b'sayif. We already saw this source quoted already. We're using it here as well. Why would you say that you're not allowed to take a spear and poke it through the barrel? You're allowed to cut off the whole top with a knife. Answers the Gemara. Hasam vaday le'ein yafe kamachavin. When a person is cutting off the whole top of a barrel with a sword, his intentions are very clear. I want everyone to have access to the wine. I don't plan on putting this top back on right now. However, if you're making a little hole in it, and that's the distinction here. But im isa if really what you're trying to argue is that people should have been able to drink more, you should have made a bigger opening than opening it with a spear. You should have done what the other Bryce said, which is cut off the whole top with a knife. By virtue of the fact that you stuck a spear through it, which is a very small hole, so then that's considered to be not allowed. So this some of the distinctions that are outgrowths of this daf, and we're going to see more the next time we learn, is that opening bottles on Shabbos, opening cans on Shabbos could be very problematic. There are some posting who hold that it's an Isser D'Oraisa based on this Mishnah of making a nekev, of making a hole. It's pre-scored by the machine that the top should open in a very specific way, and that may be what's called a nekev yafa in the posting, and possibly an Isser D'Oraisa. Other Meforshim are more lenient because they say the whole thing is garbage. The whole thing is just meant to be thrown out. It's not a nekev yafa. The can costs 10 cents, 5 cents. It's not a nekev yafa. So these are some of the poskim in regards to that. In regards to this is a real problem. If you have these metal caps that were crimped around the opening of the bottle, those are very problematic on Shabbos because now you're making a new kli on Shabbos. The cap is the new kli. When you unscrew it, it's makeh b'patish on the cap that it's now a functional kli. We have teaspoons. We have quarter teaspoons in our house. That's a shear. Even though it's garbage, you're never going to use it other than for the bottle. Afal pikim, we don't allow it, so therefore some poskim recommend either to not open them or to open them before Shabbos, or the eitzah on Shabbos is to stab it with a knife before you open it. And that way, when you take off that metal top, it's ruined. And now it's not a functional kli, and that solves that problem. And the last and least complicated is the plastic bottle tops on a Coke bottle, which is probably the most prevalent example. And in such scenarios, there's a split in the poskim as well on two fronts. Number one is this considered permissible because it has the perforations on it? Is that mechatech? And number two is sometimes there's printing across that crease line between the top of the cap and the lower ring in the cap. And if you separate that, is that like mochik? These are just some shilas that come up. Ask your local Orthodox rabbi. My rabbanim were of the opinion that you cannot open cans. My family, we don't open cans on Shabbos. We do not open metal caps at all without stabbing them first. And we open plastic bottles as long as there's no writing on the actual breaking point. We'll stop here for tonight. We're not learning tomorrow night, and we're not learning Thursday night. We're back again on Shabbos at 6 p.m. And we're going to keep doing a blot and a half until we are caught up, which I believe is by Tuesday. Have a beautiful night.